We've been told that the Great Pyramid is the starting point, the peak of ancient engineering that appeared out of thin air. But what if I told you that by the time the first stone was ever laid at Giza, the blueprints for the ancient world were already 8,000 years old? Hidden in the bedrock of Turkey lies a mystery that mainstream archaeology cannot explain. It's not just the size of the stones, it's the logic applied to them. We're seeing master classes in multiple technical disciplines literally being printed into 20-ton blocks of limestone. This isn't a tale of hunter-gatherers learning how to farm, but rather the story of a mobile engineering corps, the survivors of a constantly changing world, carrying a pre-calculated architectural standard across the globe. My name is Evan Flay, and this is part one of a 10-part journey to track perhaps the single most advanced technical lineage of our ancient past. From the mountains of Anatolia to the plains of Giza, we are going to reconstruct the lost history of the group that built the world. Welcome to Fire and Stone. The traditional narrative of human progress is a linear ascent. We're told that for hundreds of thousands of years, anatomically modern humans lived in a state of technological stasis, only awakening to the possibilities of settled life and monumental architecture around 10,000 years ago. This transition, the Neolithic Revolution, is often framed as a period of trial and error, a kind of slow and accidental discovery of how to move and shape stone. However, the physical evidence at sites like Göbekli Tepe, located in the southeastern Anatolian region of modern-day Turkey, contradicts this narrative. The site does not reflect the beginning of a learning curve. It reflects the deployment of a finished engineering standard. When we analyze the specific geometric logic used to assemble these monoliths, a startling reality emerges. The blueprints for the ancient world may have already been finalized before the first stone was ever quarried at the site. Göbekli Tepe dates to approximately 9600 BC, placing it firmly in the pre-pottery Neolithic A period. To put this in perspective, this is 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza and 6,000 years before the first evidence of the wheel. According to mainstream archaeology, the people who built this complex were hunter-gatherers with no permanent settlements, no metal tools, and no established hierarchy. Yet, they excavated and moved over 200 massive T-shaped limestone pillars across several circular enclosures. The largest of these pillars stands around 5.5 meters tall and weighs nearly 20 tons. And in the nearby quarry, there were unfinished pillars that were found that would have weighed upwards of 50 tons. Moving these monoliths requires more than just manpower. It requires a clear understanding of mechanical advantage, friction reduction, and the structural integrity of the stone itself. While the scale of the pillars is the primary focus for most visitors, the most significant forensic data point is hidden on the lower surfaces of the monoliths. On several pillars, particularly those in enclosures C and D, the builders carved protruding stone tenons, vertical rectangular tongues extending from the base of the T-shape. These tenons were not decorative. They were engineered to interface with corresponding hollowed-out mortises, or slots, carved directly into the bedrock pedestals. In modern carpentry and timber framing, this is known as mortise and tenon joinery. It's one of the most effective ways to create a rigid interlocking joint between two perpendicular members. The presence of this specific joinery at 9600 BC creates a technical paradox. In stone masonry, gravity and friction are generally sufficient to hold a vertical pillar of that weight in place. To carve a tenon directly out of the base of a 20-ton limestone block, which would require removing a significant amount of waste stone from the monolith, is an extraordinary expenditure of energy and risk. If the tenon fractures during the carving or transport process, the entire block is rendered useless for its intended structural role. The use of mortise and tenon joinery in 9600 BC stone is a material transfer anomaly. This type of joinery is natively suited for flexible organic materials like wood. In timber construction, you use mortise and tenon because wood expands and contracts, so you need a physical lock to prevent the structure from just pulling apart. You don't just stumble upon this logic when you start working with limestone. This strongly suggests that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were possibly applying an inherited engineering logic, one that had been perfected in a different medium, likely shipbuilding or timber framing over thousands of years. This would mean that we're seeing a lesson in woodworking logic being printed into stone, which points to a reality where the builders were not Neolithic discoverers, but rather the survivors of a pre-existing technical lineage that had preserved this knowledge through the environmental catastrophes of the Younger Dryas. Beyond the joinery, the orientation of the pillars reveals a mastery of structural stress. The central pillars of the enclosures are set into shallow pedestals carved directly into the bedrock. To keep a 20-ton top-heavy T-pillar balanced in a seismically active region like Anatolia, the builders would have likely had to calculate the center of gravity and the distribution of weight with extreme precision. Mainstream history suggests that these pillars were carved with nothing more than flint tools. While flint is harder than limestone, the level of precision required to carve deep 3D relief art, including leopards and foxes and vultures, directly onto the face of a 40,000-pound block suggests a highly specialized guild of masons. Art of this complexity requires a stable food supply, a chain of command, and a specialized education. You cannot have part-time masons carving 20-ton pillars. This implies the existence of a technical elite, a sophisticated group that was exempt from hunting and gathering to ensure that the engineering standards were maintained. Why build something this difficult? Why use mortise and tenon in stone? The answer lies in permanence. If you have a set of technical laws like mathematics or geometry or astronomy that you believe are essential for the survival of your people, you're probably not writing them on wood that's going to rot or hides that are going to decay. You carve them into the most permanent medium available, the earth itself. Göbekli Tepe was a technical time capsule. It was the reestablishment of a high civilization standard in the wake of the Ice Age. The builders arrived in Anatolia with the skills already in their heads. They knew exactly how to join stones, how to balance weight, and how to orient their structures to the stars. As the climate of the Anatolian plateau continued to heat up, this elite group of engineers realized they needed a more stable sanctuary. The mountain plateau was a starting point, but it wasn't their final destination. They had established their architectural standard. They had proven that they could translate woodworking logic into massive stone. Now, they needed to move toward a location where they could build for the long term, away from the highlands and toward the fertile valleys of the south. They were no longer just refugees. They were a group of mobile, skilled engineers. They packed their blueprints, encoded in memory, proportion, and practice, their knowledge of the pillar, and their mastery of the stone joint, and began a migration that would eventually reshape the entire Levant. Next, we follow this technical lineage to the Jordan Valley. We'll examine the Tower of Jericho, an 8.5-meter stone high-rise with an internal precision-cut staircase. We'll analyze how the geometry of the interlocking pillar was evolved into the math of vertical load-bearing, suggesting that these builders were mastering three-dimensional internal space over 5,000 years before the rise of the first pharaohs. And finally, do me a favor, guys. Hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you're really not going to want to miss this. There's more episodes coming out soon.